The wind on the high desert does not whisper, it scrapes. It carries the grit of forgotten graves and the ghosts of 1,000 bad decisions, a dry, rasping breath that chills the soul long before it ever touches the skin. And on such a night, under a bruised sky bleeding its last violet light onto the sawtooth peaks of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, a shadow detached itself from the greater darkness of the pines and stumbled toward the single, defiant point of light that was the MacArthur Ranch. It was not the shadow of a man, nor a beast, but something in between, a creature of rags and desperation, moving with the shuddering gait of one who has long since argued with death and lost the will to continue the debate. The ranch house, a low-slung fortress of sod and timber, stood as a bastion against the encroaching void, its lamplight a golden lie of safety in a world painted in shades of betrayal. Inside, Elias MacArthur felt the cold before the draft reached him, a primal tightening along his spine that had nothing to do with the temperature and everything to do with the ancient instinct that recognizes a shift in the world's equilibrium. He was a man carved from the very landscape, his face a roadmap of droughts and hard winters, his eyes the color of flint, and in his hands, which could break a wild stallion's spirit or cradle a newborn lamb with equal tenderness, rested the fragile weight of his entire world, his 6-month-old son, Samuel, who burned with a fever that no poultice or prayer could break. Elias's world had shrunk to the 4 walls of this room and the terrifying rhythm of his son's ragged breath. His wife, Eleanor, was 6 months in the ground, taken by the same ruthless fever that now threatened to claim their boy, and her absence was a physical void, a coldness on the other side of the bed that seeped into his very bones. He was a man who commanded respect from 500 head of cattle and a dozen hardened ranch hands, yet he was utterly powerless before this tiny, gasping creature. The wind moaned a dirge under the eaves, and in that moment, Elias MacArthur, the unyielding patriarch, felt the foundations of his soul begin to crack. It was then, at the precise apex of his despair, that the dogs began to bark, not with their usual territorial bluster, but with a low, uncertain whine that spoke of a presence both alien and unsettling. A fist, more a soft thud of bone against wood than a true knock, sounded on the heavy oak door. It was a sound so meek, so devoid of expectation, that it seemed to absorb the very silence around it. He opened the door not to a gunslinger or a bandit, but to a specter. She was a girl, perhaps 17, but the harsh hand of the trail had aged her prematurely. Her clothes were little more than sodden scraps, her hair a matted nest where the rain and dirt had conspired to create a single, tangled shroud. But it was her eyes that held him captive. They were the color of a winter sky moments before a blizzard, and in their depths swirled a tempest of such profound sorrow, such absolute desolation, that Elias felt a cold knot tighten in his gut. She did not meet his gaze for long, her eyes dropped to the rough-hewn floorboards as if she were unworthy of even the simple dignity of a plank of wood. "No one wants me, sir," her voice was a rasp, a dry creek bed in a season of drought. It was a statement of fact, devoid of self-pity, carrying the heavy finality of a verdict passed and accepted. Then her gaze flickered past him, into the warm heart of the room, toward the faint, fretful cry of the baby.
Need some help out here in
A
the
change, subtle as a shift in the wind, came over her.
Can I offer you some help?
A flicker of something other than survival sparked in those pale, desperate eyes. "But I can nurse the baby." The words hung in the air between them, a preposterous, impossible offer. This half-dead waif, this creature of the wild, claiming the one power he so desperately needed, the power to nourish, to heal, to sustain life itself. Every instinct born of a hard life in a harder land screamed at him to shut the door, to bar it against the ill omen she undoubtedly represented. She was trouble. She was hunger. She was the embodiment of the very desolation that lurked beyond the circle of his lantern light. But then little Samuel wailed again, a weak, pitiful sound that clawed at the last of Elias's resolve. He looked from the girl's hollow, hopeless face to the feverish face of his son, and in that crucible of impossible choice, a strange calm settled over him. He stepped back, a single, silent motion that opened a passage from her world of shadows into his world of fragile light. As she shuffled past him, a faint scent of pine sap and cold earth filled the room. And Elias MacArthur, a man of few words who believed actions were the only true scripture, leaned close to her ear, his voice a low,
Ma'am, is
gravelly
everything all
whisper
right?
that carried the weight
Can I
of a
offer you some
sacred
help?
vow. "You're wanted here." Her name, she said, was Cora. It was the only piece of her past she offered, and Elias did not press for more. He watched, a silent sentinel of disbelief and burgeoning hope, as she washed her hands and arms with a thoroughness that spoke of a knowledge beyond her years, the grime and blood rinsing away to reveal skin pale and strangely delicate. She approached the crib not as a stranger, but with a reverent hesitance, as if approaching an altar. When she lifted Samuel into her arms,
Evening,
the
ma'am.
baby, who had
Need
been
some help out
restless
here in
and
the cold?
fitful for days, stilled.
Ma'am, is everything all right?
His crying
Can I offer
ceased
you
into
some
a
help?
series of soft, hiccuping sighs. Cora settled into the rocking chair by the fire, its worn runners groaning a familiar song, and with an ancient, instinctual grace, she fed the child. Elias watched the terrible, flushed tension drain from his son's face, replaced by the peaceful flush of contented sleep. It was a miracle. A quiet, impossible miracle performed by a ghost in a worn-out dress. In the days that followed, the MacArthur Ranch, once a place defined by its grim determination and the
Evening,
lingering
ma'am.
ghost of Eleanor,
Need some help
began
out
to
here in the
breathe
cold?
again. The
Ma'am, is
fever
everything
broke
all
and did
right?
not return.
Can I offer you some help?
Samuel grew plump and bright-eyed, his gurgles and coos weaving a new kind of music through the house. Cora did not merely nurse the baby, she tended to the very soul of the homestead. She mended clothes with tiny, precise stitches. She cooked simple, hearty meals that filled the house with wholesome aromas. She was a quiet, efficient presence, a shadow that somehow brought light. But Elias was no fool. The West teaches a man that nothing of value comes without a price, and that serenity is often just the
Evening,
eye of
ma'am.
the storm.
Need some help out here
He
in the
saw the
cold?
way Cora would startle at
Ma'am,
the
is
sound of a
everything all
raised
right?
voice, how
Can I
her
offer you
eyes
some
would
help?
dart toward the windows at the approach of a rider, a flash of pure, animal terror quickly suppressed. She slept on a pallet in the corner of the main room, yet he never once heard her truly sleep, her breathing was always too controlled, too aware. She was a rabbit in a snare, even in this sanctuary he had offered. He tried, in his clumsy, masculine way, to pry gently. "You have people looking for you, Cora," he asked one evening as she shelled peas on the porch. Her hands stilled for only a second, a fraction of a
Evening,
heartbeat,
ma'am.
but it was
Need
enough.
some help out here in the cold?
"The only people who ever
Ma'am,
look
is
for me,
everything all right?
sir, are the
Can I
kind you
offer you
don't
some
want
help?
finding you," she said, her voice flat, her gaze fixed on the distant, purple horizon. It was an answer that was no answer, a confession that begged more questions than it solved. Elias felt the dark shape of her past looming just beyond his fences, a patient predator waiting for its moment. Weeks bled into a month, and the ranch prospered. The hands, initially wary of the witch child, as some had muttered, came to respect her for the peace she brought the boss and the simple decency she showed them all. The story of the
Evening,
mysterious
ma'am.
girl who saved
Need
the
some help out
MacArthur
here in the
heir
cold?
began to seep into the fabric
Ma'am,
of the
is everything all
territory,
right?
told in hushed
Can I offer
tones
you
in
some help?
saloons and around campfires. It was a legend in the making, a dark fairy tale set against the stark backdrop of the Arizona territory. And it was this very notoriety that brought the shadow to their door. His name was Silas Rook, and he arrived on a horse the color of dried blood, a long, lean man dressed in the black of a circuit preacher, but with the eyes of a bounty hunter. He tipped his hat to Elias on the porch, a smile playing on his thin lips that never reached his cold, calculating eyes. "Name's Rook," he said, his voice like
Evening,
gravel
ma'am.
shifting in a tin
Need some
cup.
help out here in the cold?
"I'm looking for someone.
Ma'am, is everything all
A
right?
girl.
Can I offer you some
Heard
help?
tell you might have taken in a stray." Elias stood, his body blocking the doorway, every muscle coiled. He said nothing, his flinty eyes fixed on the stranger. Rook's smile widened, a predatory flash of yellowed teeth. "Goes by the name of Cora. Though that ain't the name she was born with. Her given name is Cordelia. Cordelia Black." The name meant nothing to Elias, but the way Rook said it, with a mixture of contempt and vile possession, sent a fresh wave of cold
Evening,
dread
ma'am.
through him.
Need some help out
"She's
here
a
in the cold?
thief," Rook continued,
Ma'am,
his
is
gaze
everything
sliding
all right?
past Elias,
Can I offer
trying
you
to
some
pierce
help?
the gloom of the house. "Stole something precious from her rightful employer back in Silver Creek. My job is to bring her back. One way or another." Elias did not move. "There's no thief here," he said, his voice low and steady, the tone he used before a fight. "You're on the wrong spread." Rook's false amiability vanished, replaced by a cold, flat menace. "I have a bill of sale, MacArthur. A legal document." She was indentured to Josiah Prentice, the mining magnate. She belonged to him. Her running away is a crime against property. The word "belonged" curdled in the air between them. Elias thought of Cora's gentle hands, her quiet strength, the way she had saved his son. The idea that she could be considered property, a mere asset to be recovered, ignited a cold, hard fury in his chest. "I said," Elias repeated, his hand resting on the worn walnut grip of his Colt, "you're on the wrong spread." For a long moment, the two men stood locked in a silent battle of wills, the air crackling with the promise of violence.
"Evening, ma'am.
Finally, Rook gave a curt nod.
Ma'am, is
"I'll be
everything all
back.
right? Can I offer
With
you
the
some help?"
sheriff. "You're harboring stolen goods, MacArthur. Think on that." He wheeled his horse and rode out, a black stain receding into the vast, indifferent landscape. Elias found Cora in the root cellar, her body trembling so violently he could hear her teeth chattering. She had heard every word. The name, Silas Rook, had torn the fragile scab off her terror, and the story came pouring out in a choked, broken torrent. It was not a story of theft, but of survival. Josiah
Evening,
Prentice
ma'am.
was not a legitimate
Need some help out here
employer,
in the cold?
he was a monster who trafficked
Ma'am,
in
is
human
everything all
misery,
right?
buying up the
Can I
debts
offer
of
you some
desperate
help?
families and taking their children as indentured servants to work in his hellish silver mine, the Arizona Queen. Cordelia Black had been one of them, sold by a drunken father for the price of a bottle of whiskey. For 2 years, she endured the back-breaking labor, the darkness, the constant fear. But she was different. She was clever. She listened. She learned that Prentice was not just a brutal mine owner, he was a thief on a grand scale. He was systematically salting a played-out claim,
Evening,
fabricating
ma'am.
essays to lure
Need some help out here
investors,
in the cold?
and then disappearing with their money,
Ma'am, is everything
leaving
all
the
right?
indentured to
Can I
die
offer you
in the
some help?
subsequent collapse. She had stolen not gold or silver, but a small, leather-bound ledger. A book of numbers. A record of his fraud, his phantom investors, and the names of the dead he had left behind. It was his Achilles heel, and she had taken it. "He doesn't want me back to work, sir," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "He wants me back to die. And to get his book back." That night, the ranch was a fortress under siege, though the enemy was still miles
Evening,
away.
ma'am.
Elias
help out here
gathered
in the
his
cold?
men, a hardened crew
Ma'am,
who
is
had ridden
everything
through
all right?
fire and flood with
Can I
him.
offer you some help?
He told them the truth. He showed them the ledger, its pages a damning testament to Prentice's crimes. He did not order them to stay, he gave them a choice. To a man, they stayed. They were no longer just ranch hands, they were defenders of a cause, guardians of a truth that was bigger than any one of them. The following day, Rook returned, as promised, with the sheriff of Tombstone, a weary-looking man named Harlow who clearly wished he were anywhere else. With them came a half-dozen of Prentice's hired
Evening,
guns,
ma'am.
rough men with
Need
dead
some help out
eyes
here
and
in the
hands
cold?
that never strayed far from their
Ma'am, is
irons.
everything all right?
They
Can I
faced
offer you some
Elias
help?
and his men on the dusty yard between the house and the corral, the air thick with the scent of sweat, leather, and impending death. "This is your last chance, MacArthur," Rook called out. "Hand over the girl and the book, and we ride away. Otherwise, this place will burn." Sheriff Harlow shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Elias, he's got a legal paper. I gotta enforce the law." It was then that Cora stepped out of the house. She did not shuffle or cower. She
Evening,
walked
ma'am.
with a straight back
Need
and a
some help
lifted
out here in
chin,
the cold?
her winter sky eyes
Ma'am,
clear
is
and
everything all
steady.
right? Can I
She
offer
held
you
the
some
ledger
help?
in one hand, and in her other arm, she held Samuel, who was sleeping peacefully, unaware of the drama unfolding around him. The contrast was staggering, the innocent child and the damning book. The law. Cora's voice, once a rasp, now rang out clear and sharp as a bell. "Is the law this?" She held up the ledger. "A record of lies and murder. Josiah Prentice is the thief. He has stolen fortunes and he has stolen lives. My life.
Evening, ma'am.
The lives of
Need some
dozens
help
of
out here in
others
the cold?
buried in unmarked graves at
Ma'am,
the
is
Arizona
everything all
Queen.
right? Can I offer
Is
you
that the
some
law
help?
you serve, Sheriff? She turned her gaze to Rook and the hired guns. He pays you to protect his secrets. But what is your silence worth when you stand before your final judge? Her words, imbued with a moral authority that transcended any man-made document, hung in the air. The hired guns exchanged uneasy glances. The righteousness of her cause was a force they had not anticipated. Rook, sensing the shift, went for his gun. It was a blur of motion, a decision made in the
Evening,
space
ma'am.
of a single,
Need some help
frantic
out here in the
heartbeat.
cold?
But
Ma'am,
Elias
is
was
everything all
faster.
right? Can I
His
offer you
draw
some
was
help?
not flashy, it was economical, a single, precise movement born of a lifetime of readiness. The roar of his Colt was a thunderclap that shattered the tense silence. Rook staggered back, a look of profound surprise on his face, before crumpling into the dust. The shot was a punctuation mark to Cora's speech, a period of finality. In the echoing aftermath, the spell was broken. Sheriff Harlow, his face pale, looked from the dead Rook to the defiant girl, to the resolute face of Elias MacArthur. He slowly raised his hands. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding," he said,
Evening,
his
ma'am.
voice shaky.
Need some help out here in the
"I
cold?
think I need to take a look at that
Ma'am,
book."
is everything all right?
The hired guns,
offer you some
now
help?
leaderless and morally adrift, offered no resistance. The confrontation was over, not with a protracted gunfight, but with a single shot and the unassailable power of the truth. In the weeks that followed, the fallout from the ledger unraveled Josiah Prentice's empire. The territorial governor, pressured by the evidence and the public outcry, launched an investigation. Prentice was arrested, his mind seized. The legend of the MacArthur Ranch grew, but it was no longer just a story about a mysterious girl. It was a
Evening,
story
ma'am.
about how the most broken
some
of
help out
things
here
can
in the
become the
cold?
most strong, how a
Ma'am, is
single
everything
act of
all right?
compassion can alter
Can
the
I
course
offer you
of
some
many
help?
lives. Cora did not leave. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of fiery glory, painting the desert in hues of orange and gold, Elias found her on the porch, watching Samuel play in a patch of wildflowers. She turned to him, and for the first time, her eyes held no trace of the storm, only a deep, abiding peace. "You told me I was wanted here," she said softly. "I didn't believe it then. I think I do now." Elias nodded, the ghost of a smile touching his
Evening,
weathered
ma'am.
face.
Need some help
"This
out
is
here in
your
the cold?
home, Cora.
Ma'am, is everything
For as
all
long
right?
as you want it."
Can I offer you some help?
She was no longer the girl no one wanted. She was Cora MacArthur in all but blood, a sister, a daughter, a guardian of a new legacy. The wind still scraped across the high desert, but it no longer carried the ghosts of her past. It carried the scent of rain on dry earth, the promise of a future built not on the dust of what was lost, but on the
Evening,
solid,
ma'am.
unshakable
Need some help out
foundation
here
of
in
a
the cold?
family forged not by
Ma'am,
chance,
is everything
but by
all right?
choice.
Can I offer you
And
some
in the
help?
quiet heart of the wilderness, a new legend was born, a testament to the fact that sometimes, salvation arrives not with a fanfare, but with a whisper, and the most wanted souls are those we are wise enough to welcome home.